Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the On Becoming Legend podcast, where every week it's my job to help you live a legendary life in whatever way you define it. I do this by bringing you new content from my own life and from interviewing other legendary people so you can learn the lessons from the mistakes that we made and avoid them in your own life. This week, I'm talking with the legendary Winston Collier. Winston is an attorney, coach, and consultant that helps leaders and businesses refine their purpose so that they can have joy at work and meet their goals. He helps business leaders achieve their goals, grow their businesses, solve problems, and get team buy-in by helping them think strategically, communicate effectively, and by connecting them with the right people. He often speaks to business leaders in large medical groups, as a frequent keynote speaker at large conferences and organizational summits, and most importantly, he's a dedicated husband and father of 4. Winston, welcome to the show, my man.
All right. Thank you for having me, man. I'm excited. It's the first time I've ever been called legendary, but I'm going to take it.
Hey, I'm a firm believer. Everyone's a legend in their own right. It's just about finding that content. So we're going to pull that out of your story here. So in doing some prep for the show, so I asked around about you a little bit. I'd like to go a little further back than I typically do.
Wow. I
have it on good report that your grandfather's story is kind of a true rags to riches, if you will. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
So I would just love to hear you kind of offer some detail for that story and tell us a little bit about his journey, because I think there's some correlations to your journey and kind of where you are now.
Yeah. That's astute of you to point out, and you must be good at your research. I will tell you, I was thinking before we hopped on this call or this podcast that my story begins with my grandfather's story. As he used to colloquially say to me, man, we grew up as poor as a church mouse. And that's true. And I've seen pictures where they're not wearing shoes and sitting out on the front porch of an old dusty farmhouse, because my great-grandfather was a sharecropper, and he would find seasonal work in the rural parts of Arkansas to try to support his family. He was a single father of 3 boys.
Wow.
And times were very tough. They made do with what they could, but it was sort of in those times of scarcity that I think my grandfather forged what would ultimately be his legend, right? The things that he passed on to both my father, myself, and now my brothers as well. But he grew up and had to work his way through high school. He actually ran the paper route every day before high school for like a nickel a week. You hear those stories.
Help me understand what time frame are we talking about? When was he kind of in his teens? You know what decade that was?
So he would have been born in the, let me do my math right here. He would have been born in the late 20s, early 30s.
Okay.
And so this would have been in the 40s when this was going on.
Yeah.
Because my dad was born in 54. I don't think he minded me sharing that. And I think my grandfather was in his early 20s when my dad came along. So extrapolate it from there.
Yeah.
But it was a tough time, at least for he and his family. No education. And so he's a story of someone that did not rely on some of society's definitions of what one needs to become successful. He had nothing but his own bootstraps to pull himself up by. He parlayed his work ethic. To be honest, this is sort of an answer that I've yet to really get from anyone, but I don't think that he even finished high school. I think back then there weren't these state mandates that you do.
Right.
But so anyway, he when he moved out or reached the age of 18, moved out on his own and started a junkyard in this little town that I'm sitting in now and that I grew up in, of about 1,200 folks, poverty-stricken area. Really a story of sadness in a lot of ways.
Sure.
But he started a junkyard with just some old metal scrap. And my dad tells stories about his upbringing in that very small home with his mother and his father and his 3 siblings. But they would play out in the yard as all children do, except they didn't have shoes. And he would often talk about getting cut on a piece of rusty old scrap metal. And, I don't guess tetanus or shots like that were a thing back then because they just had to tough it out. But, I have these vivid memories, although I wasn't there, just these vivid thoughts of them running around dirty, probably unbathed after a few weeks, playing in the yard amidst this junk and scrap metal. He ultimately parlayed that into a used car dealership, and worked hard at that. And then that sort of morphed into a new car dealership. And then in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, he decided that he wanted to get into farming and owning land, farmland. And through just hard work, dedication, and just being intuitive and innovative in his own sort of non-educated way, really began to amass a great deal of farmland. And ultimately, by the time I came along, was really becoming one of the prominent farmers and landowners in the area. Ran a pretty large operation. And so I gained a lot of inspiration from that story. But I think what I gained most from it was that he was motivated, and it was just of extreme importance that his children and certainly his grandchildren, and he was one of the best grandfathers I've ever heard of, and certainly a mentor to me and an inspiration to me, but that we not have to sort of grow up the way that he did. And so, my dad was the first person in his family to go to college, and he actually did go on to college and then medical school. And then, I had the good fortune of getting to know my grandfather as I got older. And he passed away when I was actually in Cambridge, England, studying law. But I remember before I left, he was sick. He ultimately succumbed to Parkinson's, and that's I don't know if you know much about that disease, but man, I did not, and now I do, and I certainly wouldn't wish it on my worst enemies. It's a pretty sad and tragic disease, the way that it proceeds and progresses. But anyway, before I left, I sat down with him, and he said, in his hospital room, and it was. We stopped short of saying this is our goodbye, but it was very clear that was what was transpiring. And he told me, he said, regardless of what happens, I'm so proud of you, and I hope that that everything that I did to get to this point was for you and for your children that I don't know, that I probably won't meet.
Right.
And I hope that you continue to forge a path and leave a way for those that come after you. Right. And so, we were speaking earlier about live events and the value thereof. And I had the opportunity to attend one that we discussed back in May. And, I was asked on stage about the influence this person had had on me. And I told that story because it's something that I carry with me every single day to make sure that my mindset is proper to face the day. So, yeah.
I love that. And there's so much depth to that. And there's so many things that I want to touch on. So I'm going to try to remember all of them and keep my thoughts organized. So I love what you said about him and education, but it seems to me that education is a mandatory thing. Like you mentioned is kind of a new, this is like a new social construct that we've created where like it's mandatory that you be educated. I mean, entire generations of people were, I guess, technically uneducated, but, were brought up sort of by the family. And I'm curious, do you think in a situation like his, and I'm trying to like make this relevant for somebody who might be in a similar situation, thinking about their own education.
Sure.
Do you think education would have changed his path? Like, would it have made him better, or is he just that kind of person that's just going to be good no matter what?
Yeah.
Would it have been a benefit to him, I guess is probably a simpler way to ask it.
No, it's a really good question. And, and I've thought about it a lot. I have the opportunity to sit on a board of directors for a bank. And one of the most brilliant people that I serve with on that particular board, I don't know that they've got the formal educational trappings that a lot of my other board members do.
Mm-hmm.
And they are by far the most like impressive, intelligent, successful people. Yeah. And I've also listened to your past podcasts, and I have watched you sort of tease this out of your different people. And you and I share some coaches that didn't do the college thing. I think where I land on that is that, you hear my phone ringing? Sorry about that.
No worries.
It's, I think it's a case-by-case scenario. I think it's different for each person. I don't think there is, or that there should be some construct wherein it's just so heavily relied on or expected. I do not agree with that. I think for my granddad, it actually would have been a detractor. I think it would have harmed his progression. Because he was an action taker. He wasn't a philosopher, right? So any time that he would have spent studying the classics, right? And this is coming from a dude that majored in English and political science. So like I read all the classics, right? But like that would have run afoul and been contradictory to like what he was all about, which is just, get up. It's really simple. You set your hands to your goal that day, and each day you work towards it. You value relationships. You value the opportunity to network. You are friendly to everyone, and you help any chance you get. And I think he was able to start doing that at age 20 instead of going off and struggling through school, which from what he told me, he didn't like have a passion for, right?
Right.
And so I think therein lies the answer. That's probably an overly wordy way of telling you, but I think there are people out there that want to do it, that want to further their education, whether it's one of your podcast guests, Keenan, that want to pursue athletics because it means so much more than just a sport. It becomes their identity. It gives them a sense of purpose and achievement and something to reach for. In that case, I don't think that there should be a backlash or a reason that one should not pursue college. I feel like in a lot of ways, higher ed's getting a bad rap now. Like it's people do it because they couldn't otherwise succeed. And I think that's too far the other way. So I don't think that it's required. In a lot of scenarios, I don't even think it's necessary. I think it can be harmful and confusing. In some scenarios, I think it can be helpful. Like me, it was very helpful for me to be able to lean into some of my budding communication skills, right? To have to forge my own way when I was dropped into a university with 15,000 kids. I knew one of them. I think maybe not from like a textbook standpoint, but from just a social navigation standpoint, I really had to learn how to interact and fend for myself and find my place. That was very valuable for me. I think life is going to present all of us, whether it's you in the military or different my grandfather in the workforce, opportunities to find your way. I think higher ed can be a scenario where that occurs, but I certainly don't think it's the only one or the right one. I think a lot of that has to do with what you want to do. And I know this is probably where you're going next, and it's something that I have struggled with deeply. I don't think it needs to be something that one does because they feel as if someone else has expectations that they'll do it. I think it needs to be something they do because they desire to do it.
And yeah, I'd love to talk with you on that point, because it would have made perfect sense to me if you said, this is my grandfather's story, and so there was never an option for me to not get educated.
Right.
That, he sort of projects forward the challenges he had. He thinks school's the solution. And so I'm very curious to hear you talk about how you made the decision to go to college, and what that was like for you, and what some of those influences were, and kind of what were the, if there were any, what were the competing conversations for your attention around that time when you were making that decision?
Yeah. And here's the funny thing. Like, I think that my granddad did have those expectations of my father. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You are going to go to college. You're not going to suffer the way that I did. You're going, like, I've done all this, but, and the next step is that you're going to do this.
Right.
Rory, I'm not so sure that wasn't a function of the times.
Sure.
Now with technology and innovation, I think it has diminished the importance, maybe not the value, but the importance of college to success, right? Sure. Now, but back then it was still, you got to remember, there was no internet, and there
right.
weren't a lot of the things that have sort of have been the great equalizer, right? And so I think just in his mindset, that was the culture then. To elevate yourself, education was a part of it. This is something that I really struggle with, and I'll be transparent with you. I have had moments in my life to where I did feel that was going to be the next step for me. But I also had moments where it's what I wanted to do,
right?
And reconciling those. So for me, I was anxious. I found my mom keeps like scrapbooks from when we were in kindergarten, and I wrote in kindergarten that I wanted to be a lawyer. Right.
Oh, wow.
I was always fascinated with political figures. I had the opportunity through my grandfather, who ultimately got to be, friends or good acquaintances with former President Bill Clinton. And regardless of how you feel about his policies, he had this magnetism about him. His ability to remember names, his ability to make one feel as if they were the only person in the room when he was talking to him. I remember being like 10 and 12 years old and being mesmerized by that, right? And so because those things interest me, when I would feel the pressure from like my father, who, was very much coming from a good place, right? But would say things like, well, I think you should really look into double majoring and maybe going to law school. I think if I had not been inclined and like had a genuine desire to do that, I could see it put me in a tough situation, because I struggle with being a people pleaser, right? I struggle with seeking validation from other people. I really struggle with putting other people's expectations ahead of my own expectations for myself. I am so thankful, and I say this with the most authenticity possible, that like I actually wanted to go do that, right?
Right.
And I often think back, like, what if I would not have? I've got a younger brother. He's just a year younger than me, that went to college, and studied psychology, and would have been like, the next step would have been like, he would have been an amazing author or coach or psychologist, psychiatrist even. But he is not that type of educational establishment kind of dude.
Right.
And he has since started his own real estate company that just fits him. He does a lot of real innovative things from a marketing standpoint. He's built an agency from like 1 agent to 80 agents. And
wow.
Like, he's loving it because he's kind of in his jet stream doing his thing. And so I think he's a nice study. I think for a while there, when in his higher education, he would probably question how is this a means to the end of my fulfillment? I am so thankful that not only has he found that fulfillment, and it's sort of separate and apart from like his formal higher education, but I could see him grappling with that. And I think had I not have been wired to want to kind of be an attorney, to want to help people, to want to use my communication skills to do that, I could have been faced with that same type of dilemma that he was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you mentioned about the time, because I've had this conversation with people where, you know, when my grandfather was going to college or not going to college, there weren't no collar jobs. It was white collar and blue collar, and that was it. So even if your white collar job was a 90-hour week job, you were still grateful to not be in the warehouse or the factory or in the field.
Exactly.
So, yeah, 100%. Like, hey, you need to get a degree to go do these other things. But now, like you're saying, I mean, there's this entire sort of middle no collar realm of people who work from home and side businesses and e-commerce store owners that is a new reality. And I really respect what you said about your brother, because I where it becomes an issue, I think, is the identity problem. Is if you are taught or told your whole life that a degree equals success, and then you want to not get one, like I feel like there's identifying as an unsuccessful person that is a real challenge for people. It's like, how do I ever sort of feel confident about myself when I've had this belief my whole life? So it's definitely, I think socially we're moving kind of that way, but it's challenging for sure. And I really am glad that you had from 5 years old knew you wanted to be a lawyer, which is wild to me. I would love for you to talk more about that. So like 5 years old, like I'm not even sure if I knew what a lawyer was. Right. So where did you foster that appreciation for the politicians? And then as you got older, what was it that kept you attracted to it, so you decided to continue down that road?
That's a good question. I think that from a young age, well, if I may back up, because you said something that I want to touch on, and then I want to answer that question. I think the expectation that one obtain a degree and then decide they don't want to, creating confusion, is very real. I also think, because I face it every day, that even if you do obtain a college degree and you get on in your career, there are moments in our lives where we look up and we say, oh my goodness, like, have I made a mistake?
Yeah.
Right. So I always knew or thought that I wanted to be a lawyer. I got in law school and thought that I wanted to be a litigator. I traveled the country on behalf of the University of Arkansas, which is where I went to law school, doing like a trial competition, myself and one other partner, and we had some really good successes. We won a regional championship and did well at nationals. And I remember having coaches from other law schools, universities, I think specifically Penn State. The coach came up to me afterwards that evening at like a little reception at a barbecue joint in Houston and said, son, I don't know what your plans are, but I know that they need to be as a trial lawyer because you have a gift. And it's like, I replay that because it meant so much to me.
Mm-hmm.
I have had moments, because the life of litigation is so emotionally exhausting. And because I love this kind of new phase that I'm stepping into, which is really more helping businesses and the individuals refine their passion, like sort of that same existential crisis that you speak of with respect to the college degree. Like, wait a minute, like, I've been told that this is what I'm good at, that this is what I should do.
Right.
But like, what if I don't want to anymore? What if as you can see, I'm way grayer than I should be at 39. What if carrying around the tragedies of people my age that have just lost their 2-year-old daughter in a tragic situation is wearing on me? Is this a scenario where, because the Lord has given me these gifts, it's incumbent upon me to have broad shoulders and carry their load? I do gain a ton of like energy from that. Would I be a sellout now if I were to toss out all of the expectations of those people and do something a little less intense or, hardcore? So my point is, I think that those type of confusing scenarios, yes, arise at that college age, but I also think as we age and as we hit this midlife, I think they rear their ugly heads, and we've got to address them whether we've got a college degree or not. At least that's what I'm learning, and in full transparency, what I grapple with daily, you know. And so wanted to make that nuanced point in case there's anyone listening. Matter of fact, I know there will be people listening that have faced that in a context other than their college degree, you know. And so your question then was, remind me, sorry about that.
Yeah. When you sort of, how you developed that idea that you wanted to be a lawyer, and then as you got older, what was it that solidified that in your mind?
Yeah. Man, you know, as a young child, I used to always like want the starring role in the school play. And then, you know, as I got older, I was that kind of annoying kid that would like always run for class this or class that. And I think I don't think that it was an ego thing. I really don't. I think what I saw was that so many people were deathly afraid to get in front of a crowd and to engage with a crowd, and then to engage just individually in those type of contexts. Deathly afraid. You know, I mean, I know someone that always says, well, I know there's a study out there, maybe it's anecdotal, that says the number one fear is public speaking, even ahead of death.
Right.
I know someone that's sort of nuanced that a little more and says, no, the number one fear is looking stupid in front of people. But for whatever reason, I learned at an early age that this was a talent that I had, and I actually liked it. While 99% of my colleagues or friends or classmates were deathly scared of it. And I don't know that it was a real direct observation, but I think as just a youngster, man, I started just realizing, hey, like, this is one thing you do well, that it doesn't appear to be a crowded space. So I think I kind of just leaned into that. I think with my love of communication, I was that kid in high school that I really loved to read. I loved English class. I loved to write. And so those things kind of all came together, and I think I just kind of stayed on that course. And those are obviously traits and skill sets that translate well for law school.
Yeah. And as you were talking about that, I was trying to think of like what other jobs might you have been a good candidate for? Because the follow-up question was be like, well, why law? And I'm curious, was it something that you sort of saw did you ever have your eye on politics, and law school was kind of a springboard to that? Or as you got older, did you think, nope, like the courtroom and doing the legal stuff is really how I want to spend my time?
Yeah. Yes. I think that's exactly how it was. I was fascinated. I went to Boys State in high school and ran for student body president in college, and just didn't quite know how. I worked in Washington, D.C. for a little bit in college. Didn't quite know how, but thought, politics will be something I want to explore. And just, I think like a lot of people in that world, just kind of thought law school would be a nice furtherance of that. It was when I got into law school that started shifting, and I became sort of less enamored with the political side of things, or maybe just more enamored with the legal side of things. And so that kind of shifted my focus there. I've been close to pulling the trigger politically a few times, but have never quite done it. And so, I don't think that I was wrong in some of those assessments. It's just like anything in life, they haven't quite worked out
right
according to plan. So
yeah, I love it. And I'm especially happy you brought up the point about us, as humans sort of facing these same questions at different points throughout our lives, because, obviously it'll come back up in your story, but it comes back up in everybody's story, where you at some point you're going to hit a fork in the road and have to pick, do I stay on the path I'm on or go somewhere else? And I don't know if this is true, but one guy's unscientific opinion, it seems like it's more common now. I think my grandfather had a much higher chance of 35 years at a company and then retiring and all that. And now it's, every 1 to 3 years, people seem to be switching jobs and doing different things. So,
Absolutely.
So you're going through college, and after that, and obviously I was able to, you've done a lot of things. I mean, you've been active in a lot of different ways. Legally, you sit on the board of directors at a bank. You were chief legal officer for our care. So you've done a lot of things. So, as you're approaching sort of the end of college, what did it look like as you sort of stepped on the precipice, and how did you make the decision about where to go after that? Or did you even have options? Was it
talking about when I started to go to law school?
After college. So you get through law school and you're sort of moving on, and now do you go directly into, a role as a lawyer, or what happened next for you?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So I did. So I went to college in the state of Mississippi. And when I finished my 4 years of undergraduate work, there's this kind of this anecdotal saying that goes around in the legal community that is, well, you want to go to law school in the state that you think that you'll ultimately end up practicing. And because I had some political inclinations at that time, I thought, well, and having grown up in Arkansas and having, family there that was decently well established, I thought Arkansas would be the state that I would ultimately live in. Spoiler alert, I don't live in Arkansas anymore, and we'll get to why I don't. But so I went back to law school at the University of Arkansas and studied there. Was very close to taking a job in Jacksonville, Florida. That was a result of some of the successes we had on the previously mentioned traveling trial team that I was on. But again, keeping with my plan for myself, I thought I better not leave and go to Florida, right? I came back to this school for this reason. So I took a job at that point in time in the part of Arkansas that I'm from. There had been a natural gas play where there was a lot of activity going on in this specific region. And it was all a lot of people were talking about, even at our law school. These big natural gas companies from Oklahoma and Texas were interviewing, and really well-paying jobs for lawyers to come be landmen and all that. And so there was a local firm back in a town of Searcy, Arkansas, which is kind of the area that I'm from, that was really deeply involved in that. And I got an opportunity to go back and work for them, kind of on the cutting edge of this new, exciting economic play that was going on there. So I did that for 2 years out of law school, and started having one of these existential crises that we talk about. That is, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? I'm sitting at a desk handling, oil and gas issues and title opinions and a lot of kind of land type stuff. And I kept getting that itch, but I'm supposed to be in a courtroom. I'm supposed to be communicating. And so I made a switch after about 2 years to a firm that was more suited to being in the courtroom. And so I made that change, was there for 4 or so years and really got in the courtroom. That was a good experience for me. And that's when the chief legal officer, general counsel role at our care opened up. And that was a lot of fun. And so I took that opportunity.
And so what was that transition like for you? So, moving into our care, were you moving away from being a trial lawyer because of your experience with that, or was it just a better offer that was right at the time? Was it another crisis? What motivated that shift?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I started to begin to feel overwhelmed. My practice at that time, I was still very, young in the lawyer world, and our firm we really had a high volume business, and it was doing. I always wanted to be like this John Grisham. Well, I wanted to do high profile civil litigation, with big things on the line. And I was finding myself sort of mired in a lot of like domestic relations, family law, criminal stuff, which I think any good litigator needs to cut their teeth there. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't what my end goal was, which was to be a litigator, ironically enough. And so I think this transition to our care allowed me the opportunity to hit pause and go into a field where I could hone in on some of my other skill sets, which were communicating. I did a lot of like public affairs work. That's where I started getting into some of the culture initiatives within the organization. Started doing a lot more public speaking, and through that, also started my own little side law firm. And through mentors and different people, different attorneys, really at that point got into some real big time litigation. And so it's just crazy. Like your question's well taken. I thought when I transitioned into this general counsel role that I was kissing litigation goodbye, but they actually kind of simultaneously occurred. And as soon as I went in as general counsel, I started getting litigation cases. And so I sort of ran those parallel for a while.
Yeah. And this is really important. So from before it, looking at our care, would most people in the legal environment have said that what you were doing was, some version of career suicide? I mean, is there sort of the attitude that if you want to move up, that you need to stay in it and put in your time and kind of work up the ladder?
Talking about on the litigation
On the litigation side, yeah.
Probably so. I mean, I would hear rumblings like, oh, well, he's, I guess he decided he's not practicing law anymore. Like I would hear things like that. I was sort of confident enough in my skill set and my connections. And I think that, I think this is sort of a takeaway, but at the end of the day, and I think you and Keenan kind of touched on this, in your 2 podcasts ago, I know what I do well. Don't do much well, but I do know what I do well. And I knew that if it was in the plans, regardless of whatever you subscribe to, whether it's the universe or God or whatever, but I knew that if my mindset and my goal was to ultimately continue to litigate, that would arise. And so, yes, I did hear rumblings like that. With that said, our care in this area is a large system, and it is in 3 states with almost 1,000 employees. So it wasn't necessarily a step down, but I do think it was a pivot that shocked some people. What they didn't know is that commensurate with me taking that job, I had reached out to some of the best trial lawyers in the state of Arkansas, and I hit it off with one in particular. And that is really what accelerated my litigation career. As like oxymoron as that sounds, it was when I got the break from that, that first litigation practice, that my litigation practice really took off, which ultimately led to sort of me having to make a decision when it became more than a side hustle, right? When these cases became more involved than something I could do on nights and weekends or on vacation time, I had to bring in my replacement at our care and train him. He's a lot smarter than I am, and pivot out onto my own, doing both, which is really cool. I beat myself up a lot over trying to find my way through it, but really having a practice that does a lot of what I did for Archer, which is sort of what you introed me as doing, right? Did a lot of culture work and a lot of business advising and strategy, and just had the good fortune recently to help our care through all of our COVID stuff. And I love that, whether it's messaging, whether it's keeping volumes high, whether it's whiteboarding things, but also had a jury trial in early March, right as things were starting to close down, where a jury awarded wonderful elderly client of ours a substantial amount of money. So it's almost like it's been tough, and it's kind of been an alleyway fight in a lot of ways, but it's weird the way that it sort of ended up where I kind of maybe subconsciously always hoped that it would,
Yeah, but there's so much wisdom in that. And I hope what people are paying attention to is the fact that from we'll call it the other side, of your transition into our care, you had no way of knowing that things would work out in your favor. There was no, and the reason I bring that up is because I feel like when we start asking questions like, well, what direction should I go? Should I go to college? Should I take this job? Should I marry this person? Sort of the presumption behind that question is that there is a right answer, or that or that there's an answer that you can find. And so much of it is exactly what you said. You knew what you wanted, you took action on it, and you just had confidence in yourself. And it worked out. It's kind of like, and it happened. Well, no, it worked out because you took action and you were confident. And it's like, I feel like if people would just approach those decisions with that same level of like, I have faith in myself, we'll see what happens, that, a lot of these sort of crises, as it were, would disappear.
Yeah. And I know I keep referencing your past podcasts.
I'm glad you know him so well. It's impressive. I'm honored.
With Keenan, when he would talk about some of his goals, right, as lofty as they may be financially, he had one phrase, one quip there that really stuck with me, and I think it sort of characterizes my journey, which is similar, although entirely different, but similar, and that is, these are my goals. I can't tell you right now how I'm going to get there, but I know that I'm putting it out that they're my goals. I love Napoleon Hill, the author. And even, a lot of my morning routine is sort of in this affirmation style of things, right? And I spend a lot of time putting those type of goals or projections onto paper, right? So I have, I've journaled every day for the last 6 years. And I also, I have a journal that I write in, but I also have a book that's a little less journally and a little more like maybe affirmations, or I like to draw things, right?
Right.
And so it's crazy because when I was just nothing but our care general counsel, sort of before this surprising litigation piece exploded, I read excerpts that affirmations like, I am a successful trial lawyer. I have recovered X amount in the last 2 years. And that was before any of this started. And I swear, Rory, that's exactly what happened. I'm not trying to get too woo-woo on you. I'm sure there are, there's scientific and behavioral and psychological reasons as to why that transpires. But what Keenan said touched on me. I didn't really know at that point how that was going to occur. But I think the exercise of revisiting it daily, every morning, is, even if it's subconsciously, is what caused me to seize an opportunity with a mentor that I might otherwise have not seen as a means to that end, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
I don't know how I got there, but I do know it was always the plan to get there. I just never in a million years would have envisioned the circuitous route that it took to get me there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that really just sort of, solidifies the value of taking action, because, like you said, you didn't know how you were going to get there, and you almost never will. I mean, you insert any goal here, you're probably not going to see all 100 steps that have to take place for you to get from here to there.
Exactly.
You can see the next one, maybe the next 3 to 5, but after that, there's just an element of faith or confidence or belief or whatever that it will be apparent when you get there. And yeah, I mean, that's just one thing I wish for so many people, that they would just take those 5 steps without waiting to kind of figure out what the end of them look like. It obviously worked out well for you. So glad to hear that. So you had our care, you had your side hustle. Now, what's the name of the firm? Is that the Collier firm?
Yeah.
That was, so you started that.
Yeah.
I guess that would have been, trying to put the time together. Was that a decade ago?
Yeah. Well, it would have been 12 or 13.
Okay.
But it was kind of dormant during my first few years at our care.
Got
and
it.
Then through these relationships and providence or whatever, it started to become less of a side hustle and more of like a true functioning practice.
Right.
Yeah.
And then do you also you worked at another firm at one point? Are you still there? I'm just going off kind of what I found on your social profiles. I can't remember, Lucas Compton, I think.
Yeah. So I'm also currently, and that's relatively new, that's as of January, I'm a partner at a PR firm with offices in DC, London. They're really a bunch of Texas guys. So, shout out to
Nice.
there, but Austin, London, and DC. And so, a lot of my clients in the business space, in the general counsel like space that I'm serving them, like I served our care, have needs, whether it's government relations, PR, lobbying type stuff in Washington, D.C. And so that firm is very well equipped to be able to provide those services for them. So it's definitely an arrow in my quiver. Not all of my clients need or want that, but if they do, it's something that we offer. A lot of my clients, because of my experience with our care, a lot of my clients on that side of my practice, the non-litigation side, are in the healthcare sector. And healthcare policy, both at a national and state level, is changing all of the time. And so it's you would be surprised probably how many times a system in Houston wants to know what's going to happen with this bill or that bill, or how much money is HRSA going to provide us, or CMS, with these reimbursements during COVID. And so that's nice to offer. I don't, there is not enough demand in the part of the country that I live in for it to be all that I do.
Sure.
But it's nice to have and to offer the clients that need it. I think it kind of vertically integrates me so that I'm able to say, yes, I can also help you with that.
So we've talked a lot about what you've done professionally, and it's a lot. I would love to sort of go back to, when you started building a family. Obviously you're married, you have kids. So when that started, I mean, it doesn't sound like you had time for any of that. I'm just curious, how you've balanced everything between, personally and professionally, and how you look at that now, because I'm sure you're still just as busy as you have been.
Yeah. Well, I got to give a shout out to my wife, man. I mean, she makes me feel like a slacker. She's a high performer, both as a mother and as a professional. So she does mortgages for a large 16 state bank.
Oh, wow.
And she has, in 2 not so distant years, finished number 1 in number of loans closed from little rural places. Like, I always laugh, and it's a big bank, one of the biggest 30 banks in America. And her main competition, and you'll appreciate this because you probably are familiar with its growth, but her main competition are her male colleagues in like Austin, Texas, which is growing exponentially.
Right.
And Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yep.
Which, and here she is in little bitty Searcy, Arkansas, and now Oxford, Mississippi, towns of 25,000 people. And in years past, in the not so distant past, she's done more volume than them. So
wow.
She is an excellent prospector and very good with referral relations. So she's doing that while we have all these other things to quote unquote balance. Look, we have a lot of help. But at the end of the day, we kind of live by that philosophy. We're done at 5, we are done at 5. I will tell you, that's what I love about litigation. I cannot think, at least with the cases I've been exposed to, of a day that I don't come home at 5 and on the top of my freaking mind is how intentional can I be in hugging and kissing my baby girl, because I have seen firsthand the tragedy that 29-year-old father has faced when his 4-year-old is no longer with him.
Right.
And so in a way it's heavy, but it's almost impossible to become overworked in a way that you don't appreciate that balance when you do the type of work that I've been exposed to. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I talk about that a lot with military service as well. And really anything where you're exposed to quote unquote tragedy or suffering. A lot of people would sort of see it from a distance and think, oh, that sounds awful. I wouldn't want to be around that all day. But there's a level of gratitude that fosters, because every day you're made aware of how bad it could be. And you just can't help but be like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that I have everything that I have. And, if I can figure out a way to sort of inoculate people with like a little bit of tragedy, I know that sounds awful, but it's like, I wish more people could be exposed to what's out there for the very reason that you're talking about.
Yeah. It's almost meditative in a sense. If you've noticed, like, never before I got into this am I sitting on the couch with my little girl and being cognizant of being present. I mean, looking at the color of her eyes. When I kiss her on the head, it sounds weird, but like, I love the smell of a little girl's, my daughter's, unwashed, sleepy head, like, because these are all what life is about.
Yeah.
And until you are, 5 feet away from a scene where it's just been stripped from a father, those seemingly meaningless times used to escape me.
Right.
And so, look, man, I would give it all away tomorrow if it started to impede on any of those things. And there have been times in my life where I did not have a proper appreciation or, moral code, or, there have been times in my life where I've not been proud of myself and my lack of balance and my priorities. But maybe it's aging, but I fully believe that it has a lot to do with just the raw tragedy that I have been in a very real way exposed to too often. So much so, I have to be careful not to live a fear-based life, right? And I'm sure you've struggled with that too. But you're right, like almost like an inoculation, like just enough to get our antibodies cranked up, but not enough to freak us all out.
If I could, just enough tragedy to make you grateful, but not like ruin your life,
Yeah.
I would love to hear you. One thing you mentioned is really valuable. You talked about you would just give it all away if you had to, if it ever started to impede on your time with your daughter. Because the reason what I'm thinking about is that person who is maybe living in poverty, and they think that if they only had more success or more money or more whatever, that their life would be better, that they would be able to sort of, be happy. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that and how you might advise somebody in that situation, to shift their perspective or whatever it might be. I would just love to hear your thoughts on that, because it's very common. You have plenty of very wealthy, successful people who are still addicted to drugs, still commit suicide, still do all these things. And you have a lot of people who don't have money and think they need it to be happy. And I'm curious what you would say to somebody in that situation to help them, manage their expectations or get out of that.
Yeah. I'll tell you, some of the most challenging times in my life, I don't think that I would be diagnosed with like any type of clinical depression, right? I think, but I think like all of us, I have ups and downs, and it is crazy. I have experienced some of my most telling downs or most severe downs after like, $1 million case.
Right.
And I've often wondered, like, why is that the case? And in a way, I think it's because I think the reason I have this sort of reaction, overcorrection, is because I feel like I should be happier about it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
I feel like I should be more excited, but I think one part of what I do, I realize that the tragedy that it took to gain that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that notwithstanding, I would take, there's studies out there that say we need to be able to meet our basic needs, right? So as you earn money up into that point, there is an incremental increase in happiness, right? When you're to get your basic needs met.
Right.
But above and beyond that, I think they've set it at like a $70,000 mark. But above and beyond that, you don't get incrementally happier the wealthier you get. I would tell someone that's, you know, in a poverty-stricken situation, like one of your past guests has said, someday you will be on your deathbed, right? And you will take stock of what you have accomplished on this planet, on your time here. And I can assure you, because I've seen it in the lives of clients and family, that the one thing you are not looking at, matter of fact, the one thing you probably wish you wouldn't have spent so much time focusing on is money. And instead, it will be on the impact that you had on your family and on those that needed you, right? Those that were, you know, less fortunate, those that struggled. I would give it all away, to use that cliche, and make just enough to provide for my family if, you know, for the opportunity to lay on my deathbed and say, man, am I proud of the impact that I made, right? And I don't just say that. Look, I'm not going to not accept remuneration for helping these people.
Right.
But that is not the key to a fulfilling life. The key to a fulfilling life is in the moments when you smell your daughter's sleepy head after she wakes up, right? And that's, you know, so that's, I hate to be morbid and suggest that people contemplate death on a daily basis. I know there are like Buddhist practices that do that, but I see why they do it, right? So to those people, I would say, think about that day, whenever it is, when your time is up and the curtain's drawn on your life, and you look back. Did you help those that needed you? Were you a good friend? Were you a good parent? Did you love those in your life? And if you did, you're happier than 99.9% of the millionaires that are going to be on the same deathbed someday.
Yeah.
So that would be my thought to them.
I relate to that so much. And I've heard the same study you mentioned where, you know, I don't remember what the number was, but just like you said, they measured, however they do, they measured happiness. And after a relatively low income, higher than the national average, but still low in the whole scheme of things, you didn't get any happier. And one of my favorite sort of anecdotes is, or, you know, I guess cliches, every 100-year-old billionaire would give his money back to be 20, but no 20-year-old would give their 80 years to have $1 billion.
Yep.
Yes. So I think it's just it's a perspective shift for a lot of people that needs to happen. And I love what you were talking about, because it made me think about influences, and I want to talk about this. So one of the themes through your story has been that you make the decision that you want to make. You're very self-directed, and in all of my conversations, this continues to come up as a theme for people who are successful and meet their challenges with success. I'm very curious if you have any concept of sort of where that came from. You know, how did you develop this confidence and knowing and belief in yourself? Was this something your parents really, you know, tried to encourage in you and really built you up? Where you have any concept of that?
Yeah, it's probably my grandparents, you know, my grandfather. So I've had two grandfathers, right? One of them still alive. And, you know, they are the two most influential people in my life. And I think it was always important to them, as it is for me and my children, to instill a healthy sort of sense of self-confidence in them. Not an egotistical one, but I really just would die if they ever sort of lived in this space where they didn't feel worthy, right? And so I guess my family, I played athletics and had really good coaches that would sort of instill that type of stuff, you know. And I think a lot of it's evolved in my 30s. You know, we haven't touched on it, but my little boy is special needs. He's autistic. Perspective shifts like that in life are valuable. They let you know that we do have one life to live. It's not always going to go according to plan. Any time wasted on not creating your best life or creating a good life for your family is just that. It is time wasted. And so sort of the 8 years that he's been around has really sort of ushered in this fundamental shift of really caring a lot less what other people think or what other people would have me do or what society would say, and sort of really being intentional about doing what is best for us and them and me and the world. You know, when you're living in authenticity with all those things, you're going to positively impact those around you. So I think I get the courage to do that from him.
There's a huge gold nugget in what you were just talking about that I feel like you just kind of glossed over. And I think it's not really surprising considering the theme of our conversation, but you talked about your son having autism, and that's framed in your mind as a positive thing in terms of the impact it's had on your life. Obviously not that you would wish you to be autistic, but it sounds like you talk about it as if it has sort of forced some good things to happen in your life.
Absolutely.
I would love to, how do you cultivate that? Cause that it is a choice, right? You had to decide how to handle it when you got the news, you and your wife, you had to sort of brace for this thing. How would you help somebody adopt that kind of mindset? Because that seems so powerful to me.
Yeah. Well, it's been a process, but it came very naturally. I mean, when we first got the diagnosis, it was the scariest day of my life. It's like there had been, like a death almost.
Yeah.
But over time, I haven't had to sort of mind trick myself into being inspired by him. He absolutely inspires me and everyone that knows him. Look, the amount of therapies that he has with a smile on his face gone through since the age of 2. Wow. Without complaint, without gripe, and still being the sweetest little fella that you've ever met. Like, I need no more motivation to wake up every morning.
Right.
It is, and I don't just say that to create some hokey narrative. Like, it's legit. Like, there was a time where like 8 hours a day, he's like doing work that like is, would be boring, or that I know is so frustrating for him. And he just does it. And everyone, I know countless young people that have gone on to get their masters in speech and language pathology that write us wonderful letters about how he inspired them to go do that. Wow. I mean, look, I keep a picture of him on my dashboard in my car, on my desk in my office. Not really because he's a charity case, but because he is who inspires me to work hard when I don't feel like it, without complaining, Right. I also, it has been beneficial for me. One, it's a perspective setting type of event that occurred in our lives. It's brought our family closer. I love watching his 3 sisters, the way they dote on him and love him, and the way that he loves them. There are families out there that are going through the same thing, and they are as lost and confused as Gentry and I were when we got the news. I absolutely love the opportunity to spend time with them. I do public speaking on behalf of the department at the University of Mississippi that has provided him a lot of therapies, and I'm very active in that. My heart goes out to, and I think we've got some cool things in the hopper, my wife and I, to the young families here in rural Arkansas, rural Mississippi, that are poverty stricken, that have an autistic child, that will not be afforded the same opportunities that Win was and is. Right. How are we going to change that? We're going to borrow some of the themes from today. I don't know how yet, but we're going to change it, and we're going to change it in a radical way. And again, I would give every penny back if someday I can say, I changed that, in honor of my son. So that's how it's made me better. Yeah.
No, I love all of that. And I hope that anybody listening can, even if there's not a direct correlation, can at least use your story as inspiration to, at least look at the quote unquote challenges or tragedies in their own life from a new perspective.
Absolutely.
I'm a firm believer that everything that we face in our life has a purpose, and it's up to us how we manage that. So we either choose to grow and be able to handle the challenges that or we just keep having the same challenges until we do.
Yeah, I'm sure you've read Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning. But like the only thing, kind of the last thing, in the throes of the horrors of a concentration camp, he says, the last kind of human dignity, the last thing that we have when everything else is stripped from us is our decision on how we respond to it. And that can never be taken from you.
Right.
No diagnosis can take that from our family. And the truer words have never been spoken, so anyone out there that's been through struggles, take your time to mourn and grieve, right? But at the end of the day, it's going to impact your life. You have the power and the freedom to determine how. And to me, there is just a lot of liberation in that, right? Can you see families who lost their teenage daughter in a tragic car accident to a drunk driver, right? Mm-hmm. They parlay that very impactful moment in their life into a lifelong mission of advocacy against drunk driving. And so there's countless stories, but look, if you're out there and you're listening and you've faced some type of tragedy like that, hit you up. We'll brainstorm ways to parlay that into changing this world in honor of your loss or of your tragedy or of your challenge. So
absolutely. Yeah, I love that. So I'd like to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, and I'd love to hear you talk about it. So you mentioned you're not living in Arkansas anymore.
Right.
So you were in school, you went to Arkansas for that school, and now you're back in Mississippi. So what did that transition look like? And what motivated that decision for you?
That transition looked very scary. That's what it looked like. At the time, my wife's business was at record-setting levels. I had experienced some of my first, very high-level successes in the litigation world, and was contemplating, some political options and thoughts and ideas like I alluded to earlier. And when my son was sort of at the age where one starts kindergarten, right? And we had him involved in sort of a remote therapy program with a clinic that was 3.5 hours away. Okay, up in Northwest Arkansas, where the University of Arkansas was. And we had hired a person to be with him back in Central Arkansas, right, where we lived. Mm-hmm. And they went through extensive training with the clinic 3 hours away, went up there and trained, and then every day would like Skype and FaceTime, but they were his person. And this was pre-kindergarten, right?
Right.
And so, and monthly, my wife and I and little Win would go up to Northwest Arkansas and meet with like the therapist up there. And so that was sort of the structure that we had cobbled together for his therapy. And right when things kind of seemed to be going so well in my wife's business and in mine, we went up for just our monthly meeting with them, and they said, we hate to tell you this, and we're certainly not trying to get you to move here, which is, Northwest Arkansas. But what we do need to tell you is that Win is progressing well, and he is on the cusp of like being able to go to kindergarten and
Wow.
to be in a what we would call a typical peer setting. But so this would have been a year before kindergarten, right? But this remote setting that we're doing, while it's good, we really feel like he would be poised to begin kindergarten if we can get it like non-remote, right? Like in
Right.
person. And so we started, that was sort of a really bitter pill for us to swallow, because we both knew there was no question that we were leaving, right? But how that looked and what type of transition was, like I said, very scary.
Sure.
So we started looking around, and that's when we got engaged with the University of Mississippi and what's specifically called the Hill Center as part of their School of Applied Sciences, where they work with speech and language development issue, and wonderful program. But so we weighed our options and ultimately packed up everything. Gentry moved to an entire new market, not knowing anyone, and kind of ceremoniously kissed our careers goodbye, loaded our family of 6 up, and headed east across the Mississippi River, landed in Oxford. Keeping with some of the through lines of our story today, or our chat today, Gentry's business is better now, and my litigation revenue and/or case resolution has probably tripled.
Wow.
But at the time, we thought we were turning our backs on everything, which there was no question that we would do that.
Right.
But again, it's funny the way that in life, if you have your priorities in line and you follow those meaningful metrics, right? Like family and your children or your legacy, the way things work out. And so here we are 3 years later. We love our new place. Little Win has excelled, loved it. This COVID situation has been a challenge for him. He craves routine and his friends and his peers. But we did it. And so yeah, that's the story behind that.
And I'm not terribly surprised. I'm sure you and Gentry would survive anywhere you ended up. I'm curious, do you think of yourself as an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you always, or was there a point where you suddenly realized, like, maybe I'm not cut for, this traditional, litigation path?
Well, the way I do litigation is sort of entrepreneurial. I mean, I'm not a big firm. It's usually just, me, a colleague, and my lawyer, and an associate and paralegal. There are cases where I may have a substantial amount of money invested in litigating the case, and if I lose, I get zero. Right? So there is something entrepreneurial about litigation when you're not a big firm.
Right.
That I've always liked. I think ultimately, Rory, that is what has kept me from just sticking with a role as like a chief legal officer even for a big company. As like cool, and the trappings that would come with it, as cool as that would be, I've got this entrepreneurial itch instilled in my DNA by both my grandfathers. It drives me mad. I just can't do it, and so maybe that's a curse, but I sometimes, freedom is my motivating factor in life, professionally. The freedom to go the directions I want to go, make the impacts I want to make, have the balance that I want. And look, if I had to, I could jump back into the corporate setting if like times came to that.
Sure.
But if I don't have to, I'm just more comfortable. Now, sometimes my freedom drives me crazy. I wonder, like, what do I do? Am I doing the right thing? That's why I have people like coaches, personal coaches, life coaches, kind of help me use that freedom productively. but yeah, I've always fancied myself an entrepreneur. Oftentimes a failed one, but things are good now.
I don't think you actually get the title entrepreneur until you failed at something you've tried to start.
That's right.
It's like, it's a posthumous badge for whatever your first project was.
No doubt.
Oh man, I just lost my train of thought. I was going to ask you about, yeah. So you talked about sort of always having these questions that, about, what do I do next, and wanting to pursue your freedom. So I would love to hear you talk about how you are doing that now. Like how are you creating a vision for yourself for the next, month or years, however you do it. But being successful at the things you're doing now, how are you looking at the future and kind of deciding where you're headed from here?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And my wife would tell you it changes weekly. So we may have to have another podcast or something. I think at this point, I can finally say, and it's taken me a decade to get here, but like I've got the adolescent phases of what I want, right? For a long time, it was searching, it was like, do I want to be in litigation, or do I need to be in politics, or do I need to be like a chief legal officer and focus on this organization, or do I just need to be a lawyer that doesn't do litigation but helps businesses refine their passion, sort of reminding them why they chose to get into this field, and sort of those deeper meanings that we show up and excel at work. And there was just so much swirling around that I couldn't ever package it up and figure out like who I was or who I wanted to be, right, with respect on the professional side of things.
Right.
Now I'm finally in the sweet spot, right? So I'm no longer encumbered as like a W-2 employee. I've got a firm that does two very different things, litigates, right? But because of my time at R-Care and the wonderful people there and the people that I met in the healthcare space, helping them with communications, right? Helping them with public relations, helping them with culture initiatives, helping their CEOs sort of refine their efficiencies and their passions. And so I've still got that mixed with a little bit of law, like general counsel type communication stuff.
Right.
And so what I envision now is taking this organism that is the Collier firm with the added value of Lucas Compton, if people need the federal side of things, and pouring into both of those, right? So I'm kind of in the process of a big rebrand. I'm going to do some pretty aggressive marketing stuff, maybe adding a few more attorneys, but really going to lean into sort of simultaneously building these out. They're very different. Like this side of things that is business and culture and business related, I have to lean into. I have to do a little bit of business development on. On the litigation side of things, that is sort of organic. It comes with like reputation, and it comes with people being aware that you just sued X and X, or that you just defended this company, or that you just had a victory here. So those things, it's hard to market for. There's not a set group of an audience that you can go out to, because you or I on our way to Walmart tomorrow could be the audience, right? And so I'm going to, now that I finally got this sort of infrastructure and scaffolding set up, lean into both of those, start doing some more public speaking, and grow both of these simultaneously and see where it takes me, knowing that that I'm headed down the right path.
Yeah.
Because I'm doing it for the right reasons,
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, we've been talking for a long time, Winston, and I want to be respectful of your time. So I'm going to wrap it up. I do have one more question for you, but before we get to that, just want to give you a chance to let people know how to connect with you, where to find you, for anybody that wants to after hearing what we've talked about here today.
Yeah. I'm on some of the social platforms, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. My email address is winston@thecollierfirm.com.
Fantastic. And I would really encourage anybody who's who is listening today and wants to have a conversation, to definitely reach out. I think Winston has proven here today that he's open to that and willing to help people where he can. I really appreciate it, Winston. My last question before we sign off, you probably know because you've been listening to the episodes, but what does legacy mean to you?
Well, you're right. I did know that was coming. And I hope that anybody listening sort of has picked it up, from our conversation, because it's so important to me. But, I think it's a legacy to me is this idea that it's important to me that my children know that my purpose, and I hope their purpose on this planet, is to help others, right? It's that their father left a legacy that came before everything else. It came before money. It came before all the trappings of success. That at the end of the day, he left a legacy of loving us, and the purpose of influence is to provide it to those that have none. And someday, from heaven above, I'll look down, and if they may not have gone on to earn what a lot of people do, but they've had that type of impact, I will say I am very proud of the legacy I left for them.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Winston. It's been great having you. I'm so grateful for your time. For anybody listening, I'll post links to everything we talked about in the show notes. Make sure you guys can connect with him. And yeah, just again, Winston, I'm so grateful for your time. It's great talking to you today.
My pleasure, man. Enjoyed it.
All right.